What was the Renaissance, and how do we compare and contrast it to the Middle Ages? I don't want you to get confused and think that, suddenly everybody woke up one day and the world was enlightened and we had all this beautiful art and literature. That had really been a gradual process that had happened really since the late Middle Ages. And if you look at the late Middle Ages, there was a lot going on in terms of literature. Look at the art transition with Giotto. But the Renaissance, we'll kind of talk about what the term means, where does it come from, and some basic kind of ideas from the Renaissance, including the huge idea of humanism. So, in order to understand the Renaissance, you have to go and understand what happened before the Renaissance and kind of what some of the factors are. Think about the world of the late Middle Ages. You had a lot of change going on. You had the 100 Years' War, which is the war between England and France. They're fighting each other, lots of life, loss of life on each side. The Black Death just knocks out, entire populations. Even the Papal Schism, right? People aren't dying from this, but the idea that traditional authority is being challenged, this kind of idea, we're at the point where the way that people are looking at the world and worldviews may be changing and may be shifting. And this is all going to come to the point of the Renaissance, specifically in Italy, and then from there spread to the rest of Europe. So what do we see in the Renaissance? What are some kind of characteristics from the Renaissance? We see the rise of national monarchies at the same time that we see a breakdown of the feudal system from the Middle Ages. You can check out the video if you forget how feudalism worked. And you see basically an economic upturn. And if you have an economic upturn, you have people that are able to go and start doing, the artsy things because their goal is more than don't die when you wake up in the morning. They can go and start creating all these amazing things. And you also have the rise of the banking system. And the banking system creates, economic growth. And I could go into a lot of detail how that actually works, but just understand that modern banking systems can go and provide a lot of economic growth. It's kind of like wearing a straitjacket if you don't have that on. And the Medici family is huge and instrumental as an example of one of those banking families. Okay, let's get to the definition. What is the Renaissance? Renaissance is a period in history from the 14th to 17th century, so that's the 1300s to 1600s, and it literally means rebirth. And the question is, rebirth of what? Well, it's a rebirth of people basically going and looking at the medieval Middle Ages ideologies and skipping over those and rebirthing the classical civilization, the ideas of Greece and Rome. Remember, classical refers to Greece and Rome. It starts in Italy, and the Renaissance will start from southern Italy and basically not southern-ish, and then flow further north. And what we'll see is a huge worldview in terms of humanism. Now, I don't want to get confused with humanism and what it means. It kind of depends, and to some extent, how the different Renaissance artists or thinkers interpret it. Some Renaissance artists and thinkers are Christians, and some are atheists. So it kind of depends. Think about the Middle Ages. It was a very, very God-centric worldview. The worldview went and essentially put God at the center of everything. Think about the cathedrals, the literature, the art. Everything was focused on God. Now, what humanism did, which is kind of a Greek and Roman idea, right, is going in and celebrating the accomplishments of humans. Think about the Olympics. That was, yes, it was made to honor Zeus, but mainly it was really made to honor, the human physique and the accomplishments that people could have, and that kind of those ideas of like arete, excellence, and just being the best you can be are really going to come to head. And it'll be interesting how they combine these two systems. So you take something that's very pagan, the Greco-Roman system, and you combine it with Christianity, and you get something pretty cool. Not necessarily everything has to be, Christian, but a lot of it is. So you'll see that as well. So what is humanism? Humanism is a system of thought where you put man at the center, basically humans at the center. By definition, in this, if you're going to go by this definition, inherently this is secular, meaning non-religious. And what they do is there's an increasingly increased tendency to go and start studying what we call the humanities. And that's kind of a broader view of looking at Greece and Rome. It's not just looking at the history per se, but it's looking at the art, the literature, the philosophy. So they'll look at the words that, Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, Virgil. They'll look at all these kind of classical figures and really want to emulate the ideas that they had in the art and just their worldviews. So where are they going to look? They'll look at places like the Golden Age of Athens, like I just said, Plato, Cicero, Virgil. And the question is this compatible with Christianity? Well, I'll kind of leave that up to you to decide. And according to some Renaissance thinkers, yes, and for some others, no. So it just kind of depends. Now, comparing the Renaissance art to medieval art, if you have a relatively trained eye, you can tell quite quickly which one is from which era. So going back to medieval art, think about medieval art was very God-centered, very flat, very rigid, like very, very made to make you feel kind of awe and glory of God, kind of think about the cathedrals. Now, Renaissance is different. There's going to be advancement in the way that they're drawing, so you'll see a much more realistic style. Now, I don't mean realistic in that event like this right here actually happened. I mean realistic in the fact that it might be set on a natural setting, rather than a lot of the medieval art is typically set, or can be set, almost in a supernatural setting. And even if it's in a natural setting, meaning of this world, it doesn't look like it. It's almost like almost too staged, or it doesn't make sense, or the people aren't moving well. You'll see emotion in the faces. You'll see in the Renaissance happiness, anger, laughter. You'll see a beginning of emotion, where in the medieval it was kind of just an awkward way to go and draw everybody. The sense of balance, proportion will be prevalent as well. And the themes, typically, two of the biggest, are a classical theme, so Greco-Roman myth, or a Bible story. You also later have portraits and stuff along those lines. But that's the kind of the big two. It's the Greek and Roman, and then the good old Bible stories. How do they do this? So this gets in a bit to kind of artistic techniques. So if you're into art history, you'll like this. What they do is kind of the development of linear perspective, which is the idea of using foreshortening to create 3D-ness. So to create an idea of depth into the picture. So three techniques that you got to be aware of are sfumato, chiaroscuro, and cangiante. Now, sfumato literally means something along the line like smokiness, and I'll show you examples for each of these so you can kind of get a visual. And it's a level of like blending together different parts of light, and it's kind of like if you're looking at a picture at a museum and somebody's smoking a big fat cigar in front of you, it kind of blends together. It's a little bit difficult to see. That's sfumato. Chiaroscuro is light dark. These are the type of scenes where usually it's a divine type figure, i.e. Jesus, and there's like a light on his face and it's dark around. So there's kind of like a shadowy, usually set at night. It's one of my favorite techniques. It's just very prevalent. And then cangiante. Now, this one's in some ways out of practical reasons. What you'll see is they'll change colors on cangiante means to change, like conjugate, right? It means to change. They'll change colors on a particular piece of human clothing. Sometimes that's just because they run out of color and you can't go to the art store to buy any. But it also provides a contrast. So I'm going to show you an example of sfumato, chiaroscuro, and cangiante. So think about this, is this from the Renaissance or medieval era? It's obviously from the medieval era. So this is a picture, typical Mary holding Jesus, medieval. We go from this to this. Okay? Can you tell the difference? If you can't, you haven't been paying attention. Huge difference, and I'll put them side by side here. So here they are side by side. You can kind of compare and contrast them. Think about the sense in the Renaissance painting here on the right. You can see the movement. You can see the balancing of the human weight. The people almost are intentionally, by the way, to some extent, not made to even look too realistic, because you want to avoid icon worship in the Middle Ages. Jesus doesn't even look like a baby. He looks more like a little man than a baby, rather than in the picture on the right, where he clearly looks like, like a chubby little baby. So you can really see the contrast between the two. Natural setting versus supernatural setting. You could go into a lot of details. The most famous painting in the world, Mona Lisa, has sfumato. So it's like I said, it's that, imagine a guy smoking in front of you, and see in the background, it's kind of blended, like, oh, okay, I see trees, but I can't exactly tell, which tree is which. They kind of blend together. That's sfumato. Chiaroscuro, this is that light-dark contrast, and this is, the manger scene, and you can see the glow off of Jesus on Mary's face, and, you can take a look, like, there's people in the background, but, they're very dimly lit. So they have very advanced artistic technique. And this is this is Daniel in the Sistine Chapel. And cangiante, do you see here how it goes and changes? You have the shade of the blue, and then you have the green, and then the yellow, and the red. That's the cangiante. So just kind of a basic introduction on the Renaissance and how it's classified differently from medieval, and the idea of humanism becoming prevalent, and just kind of some of the basic artistic techniques that they used in the early Renaissance period, and throughout most of it as well.